For weeks, all the lights were on at the magnificent 19-room Breeze Knoll mansion in an affluent suburb of Westfield, New Jersey. The only sound coming from inside was classical music. However, the family of 5 who lived there was nowhere to be found. Neighbors noticed something strange but couldn't figure out what was going on. That is, until the lights began to go out one by one. When police entered the house on December 7th, 1971, they were met with a chilling scene. 5 lifeless bodies lay side by side in the living room, and a confession letter was left on a table. John List, a respected accountant and devout Sunday school teacher, had killed his wife, mother, and 3 children so they could go to heaven, and then disappeared without a trace. In this video, we explore the life of John List, who lived on the run for 18 years after committing one of the most terrifying family massacres in American history. In 1965, John List moved with his wife Helen, their 3 children, and his elderly mother to a mansion called Breeze Knoll in Westfield, New Jersey. From the outside, the List family seemed to be living the American dream. John had a successful career as vice president and financial director at a bank in Jersey City. The family lived in a stately mansion with marble fireplaces and a ballroom and attended church regularly every Sunday. John's 84-year-old mother, Alma, also lived with them. Like John, she was a strict Lutheran and instilled religious values in the family. John List was known in his circle as devout, hardworking, and respectable. However, deep cracks were beginning to form beneath this flawless image. By 1971, John List was struggling with serious financial difficulties. He had lost his job at the bank, and his subsequent business ventures had ended in failure. But List's pride prevented him from revealing this situation to his family. He continued to put on his suit every morning and leave the house. He would leave home as if he were going to work. He spent his days reading the newspaper at the train station and returned home in the evenings when it was time. List, who was struggling to pay the mortgage on the house due to his lack of income, tried to manage his financial situation by secretly withdrawing money from his mother's bank accounts. For John, who couldn't bring himself to ask for financial help from those around him or from government agencies, the loss of reputation had become too great a threat to risk. He didn't want to experience the shame of unemployment, nor did he want his family to fall into poverty and be humiliated in society. During this period, problems were also growing within the home. His wife Helen had lost her health and mental stability due to the progression of syphilis, which she had contracted from a previous marriage but kept hidden, and her alcohol addiction. In recent years, Hila had become paranoid, frequently belittling John and even humiliating him in front of others by comparing him to her first husband, who had passed away. This tense atmosphere within the family put even more pressure on John's psyche. Despite all this, John List tried to appear strong and normal to the outside world, until he found a completely different solution. When November 1971 arrived, John List decided to put his increasingly concrete, horrific plan into action. In his eyes, the financial collapse they were experiencing and the evils of this sinful world had to be stopped before they led his family astray spiritually. He began to think constantly that the only way to save his family from this situation was to kill them. On the morning of November 9th, 1971, John saw his children off as usual. He then took his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver from the garage and his own 9mm pistol. He quietly approached his 46-year-old wife Helen, who was sipping her coffee in the kitchen, and shot her in the head with a single bullet. He dragged his wife's lifeless body to the mansion's ballroom and laid her on the floor. He then went up to his room on the 3rd floor and headed for his mother Alma's room. His 84-year-old mother had finished her breakfast and returned to bed. John shot his elderly mother in the head with a single shot, killing her too. He then calmly went downstairs, locked the front door, and waited for his children. In the afternoon, his 16-year-old daughter Patricia was the first to return from school. As soon as Patricia entered, her father shot her in the head, killing her. Immediately afterwards, his 13-year-old son Frederick was also shot and killed in the same manner. John List placed the bodies of his wife and 2 children on the sleeping bags he had prepared in the hall. Only his eldest son, John Jr., remained at home, but he was at the school football team's game at the time. Moving calmly on to the next stage of his chilling plan, the father took a break and prepared himself lunch. He then went to the city center to close his bank accounts and settle his bills. He even went to watch his son John Jr.'s football match at school, as if nothing had happened. He waited for the match to end, cheering from the stands. When father and son returned home together after the game, John's moment of reckoning had arrived. As soon as 15-year-old John Jr. entered the house, his father opened fire on him. According to the autopsy findings, John Jr. tried desperately to fight back against his father. However, he also lost his life as a result of the multiple shots he received. Thus, John List killed 5 members of his own family within a few hours. After committing these murders with cold-blooded precision, John List was determined to leave no clues behind. First, he cut out and destroyed any family photos in the house that showed his face. This ensured that no recent photo of him would fall into the hands of the police. He then set about cleaning up the bloody scene. He collected the empty shells. He neatly lined up the bodies side by side. He left his mother's body in the attic apartment of the house. He laid the others on beds he had prepared in the ballroom. He walked around the house turning on all the lights, and as if to add a spiritual touch, tuned the radio to a religious music channel. Meanwhile, he sat down at his desk and picked up a pen to write a long 5-page letter. Addressing whoever might find it, he left it on his desk and explained the reason for his actions. He wrote that he killed to protect his family from the evils he believed were increasing in the world and to save their souls, thereby ensuring they would go to heaven. When he finished his work, he got into his car and left Westfield. John List took measures to ensure that the murders would be discovered as late as possible. He sent letters to his children's schools and family members' workplaces, informing them that they would all be going to stay with a distant relative for a few weeks. He canceled the family's milk, newspaper, and mail deliveries. He planned for days to pass without anyone knocking on the door and noticing their absence. Furthermore, his mother-in-law, who had planned to visit the family soon, had canceled her visit because she had fallen ill during those very days. If she had come, he had planned to kill her too. The plan worked as expected. Neighbors noticed that despite no sound coming from the house for a long time, the lights inside continued to stay on day and night. Assuming the family had genuinely gone on vacation, they didn't suspect much. However, days turned into weeks, and the lack of any sign of life in the mansion began to cause concern. As the lights in the house flickered on and off one by one, the neighbors decided to call the police. Around the same time, another curious and concerned person was Patricia's theater teacher, Edna. Patricia was an energetic young woman interested in the arts, who played an active role in the school's theater productions. However, she had recently expressed fear of her father. She had even told Eliano that her father would kill her. Such a statement might seem like teenage exaggeration to most adults, but after Patricia disappeared, failed to show up for school rehearsals, and unexpectedly failed to send any news, Eliano began to suspect something was wrong. Moreover, his anxiety grew exponentially when he remembered his father's words that he would kill him. Eliano went to the house several times and knocked on the door. He got no answer from inside. The situation was not normal. Finally, he too decided to go to the police. Coincidentally, the police had already been alerted by a neighbor's report. Exactly 28 days after the massacre, on December 7, 1971, police officers entered the List family home through an unlocked window and were confronted with a horrific reality. The first thing they noticed as they stepped inside was the cold air. The house was almost as cold as outside. The heating system was turned off, suggesting the family had not been home for a long time. But even more striking was the strange music inside the house. This sound, reminiscent of some kind of church organ music, creating an eerie atmosphere, was echoing from the internal announcement system. The place was almost bare. It was as if the family had moved out. Yet it was strange that such a family would leave without a trace. As the police moved slowly forward, they noticed dark stains on the walls and floor. At first, it was difficult to understand what they were. However, as they moved toward the kitchen, it became clear that these stains were blood stains. The dried, dark stains on the checkered tiles of the kitchen floor and the wavy blood stains on the walls and corridors, which had been attempted to be wiped away but not completely removed, made them even more uneasy. The interior of the ostentatious house seemed to have been the scene of a struggle. At that moment, the smell became more pronounced. A heavy, nauseating smell, reminiscent of decay, filled the house. As they moved toward the source of the smell, the traces led to the ballroom. The ballroom was one of the most impressive parts of the house. It was spacious enough to host dance parties, family gatherings, and formal invitations. Now, however, it had turned into a dark room filled with several piles of dark-colored, thick fabric-like objects. 4 bodies lay on materials resembling sleeping bags: Helen, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. They were clothed, but their faces were covered with cloth. Having been there for weeks, their bodies showed signs of decay on their fingers and toes, swelling, and maggot infestation. It was not difficult to see that the attacker had dragged them here and laid them side by side. Bloodstains provided clues that the bodies had been dragged there. Each had been shot in the head. Not satisfied with the horrific scene in the ballroom, the police searched the house thoroughly. Loud organ music was still playing in the house. When they reached the top floor, they found Alma List's lifeless body in the small attic apartment. She too had been shot in the head. Newspapers scattered around the house, bloody towels, and bloodstains that had been attempted but failed to be cleaned up, along with bullet holes in the walls, revealed the killer's meticulous yet amateurish cleaning efforts. Police found bullet casings, firearms, financial documents, bank slips, notes, and letters in the house. In particular, the notes and documents on John List's desk pointed to the motivations, planning, and cold-bloodedness behind this horrific massacre. The letter John List left behind and the murder scene he prepared with cold-bloodedness revealed the identity of the killer who took 5 lives, leaving no room for doubt. The only thing missing was the killer himself. After the murders, List parked his car at JFK Airport in New York and completely vanished without a trace. After finding the car, the police thought the killer might have fled by air, but they found no flight records under his name. John List had already left New Jersey. Meanwhile, the fate of the Brisnell mansion also came to a tragic end. 9 months after the family massacre in August 1972, the mansion was destroyed by fire. Although the fire was determined to be arson, the perpetrators were never found. Thus, the magnificent house that became the List family's grave was wiped off the map. John List was well prepared to change his identity. After killing his family, the 46-year-old killer disappeared as if he had vanished into thin air. In fact, he calmly took a train first to Michigan and then to Colorado. He acquired a false identity under the name Robert Bob Clark. Ironically, this name belonged to a classmate he had known during his university years. However, the real Bob Clark stated years later that he did not actually remember John List. In early 1972, List settled in Denver and began working as an accountant, leading a low-key, modest life. He had mastered the art of not drawing attention to himself in society. He rejoined the Lutheran Church congregation. He even presented himself as such an active, good citizen that he organized carpools for congregation members who did not have cars. He continued to play the role of a devout man, as if he wanted to be absolved of his crimes. In his new life, John List, known as Bob Clark, rose to the position of Director of Financial Affairs at a box manufacturing company in Denver in the late 1970s. In 1985, he married a woman named Dolores Miller, whom he met at one of the religious meetings he attended. He was now living a quiet life as an accountant with his second wife. In 1988, he moved to the state of Virginia with his wife and settled in a house near the city of Richmond. There, he continued to work at a small accounting firm. No one knew that their new neighbor was actually one of the most wanted fugitive murderers in the United States. John List had established such an ordinary life that even law enforcement had begun to give up hope of finding him. The FBI couldn't find List for years, and the case began to cool. In fact, the timing of List's disappearance sparked strange speculation among the public. Could List have been the perpetrator of the famous D.B. Cooper hijacking, which occurred just 2 weeks after he killed his own family, and whose perpetrator remains unknown? In 1971, the theory that Cooper, who hijacked a passenger plane and parachuted out with a large sum of money, might actually be John List, a murderer already wanted by the authorities who had nothing to lose, was seriously debated for a time. FBI agents asked List about this possibility after his arrest. However, List categorically denied any connection to the Cooper case. Indeed, no direct evidence was ever found, and over the years, the FBI completely abandoned this theory. John List had managed to evade justice for 18 years under the guise of an ordinary American citizen. By the late 1980s, the John List case remained an unsolved mystery. But the power of technology and the media would finally lead to the capture of this phantom killer. In 1989, New Jersey state prosecutors and the FBI collaborated with the then newly launched television program America's Most Wanted. To show how John List's face might have aged over the 18 years he had been on the run, authorities commissioned renowned forensic sculptor Frank Bender. Bender studied old photographs of List from 1971 and his family's physical characteristics to create a bust from clay. The resulting sculpture was a chilling prediction of John List's aged appearance and was strikingly similar to the real thing. On the evening of May 1, 1989, the America's Most Wanted program announced John List's murders and Bender's aged bust to approximately 22 million viewers nationwide. The program explained that List had eluded capture for 18 years and that the public's help was needed. The face that appeared on screen looked all too familiar to someone from the place where List was living under his false identity in his new life. A woman named Vanda Flary, who lived in Richmond, Virginia, noticed that the bust on television bore an incredible resemblance to her neighbor Bob Clark, who had lived next door for years. She immediately contacted the authorities and shared her suspicions. This tip was about to solve the mystery of a killer who had remained shrouded in secrecy for 18 years. Police raided the house in Richmond on June 1, 1989. There, they found John List, who had played the role of Bob Clark flawlessly until his arrest. When List saw the police, he maintained his composure at first and continued to claim that he was Bob Clark. He even continued to deny it for months while in custody in Virginia and after being extradited to New Jersey. But his fingerprints did not lie. The comparison revealed that Bob Clark's fingerprints perfectly matched those taken from John List while he was in the Army in the 1940s. Furthermore, a fingerprint found at the murder scene in Westfield also belonged to the same person. There was nowhere left to run. He continued to deny it for months, even while in custody in Virginia and after being extradited to New Jersey. But the fingerprints did not lie. The comparison revealed that Bob Clark's fingerprints perfectly matched John List's fingerprint records taken while he was in the Army in the 1940s. Furthermore, a fingerprint found at the murder scene in Westfield also belonged to the same person. There was nowhere left to run. Cornered, List confessed his true identity on February 16, 1990, ending his 18-year escape. When John List was brought to trial in 1990, his case began, attracting nationwide attention. In the trial held in New Jersey, List was charged with 5 separate counts of first-degree murder. During the court proceedings, details were laid out to understand how this family man could have turned into such a monster. In his testimony, List explained that the financial collapse he experienced in 1971 left him helpless. He admitted that when he lost his job after the bank where he worked in Jersey City closed, he was too ashamed to tell his family, so he left the house every day as if he were going to work and spent his time at the bus station until evening. He also confessed that he secretly paid his unpaid bills with money he stole from his mother's savings. According to List, he had 2 options at the time. Either he would apply for social assistance and provide for his family, or he would implement his own solution. The court psychiatrist who examined him stated that List had obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and saw only 2 ways out of his situation. He would either kill his family and save them from sin, or accept help and continue living. List's strict moral and religious values prevented him from choosing the second option, that is, asking for help. The discipline he learned from his father and the belief that a real man takes care of his family, combined with the shame of unemployment, made List consider needing state assistance the greatest disgrace in the world. He felt trapped between protecting his family from the shame of poverty and restoring them to prosperity. Ultimately, he argued that he had found a way to save both himself and them by killing them, using illogical reasoning. During the trials, John List's piety and obsessive mindset were also examined in detail. He stated that he was aware that the murders he committed directly violated his own religious principles. However, when asked why he did it, despite this, he said he was so afraid that financial difficulties would break up his family and alienate his children from religion that he claimed to have made this difficult decision for their spiritual well-being. Even years after his arrest, when explaining his actions, he would say, "I wanted my family to go to heaven. I thought we could be together again." In a 2002 interview with renowned journalist Connie Chung from prison, he said, "I believe that when we reach heaven, worldly troubles will be insignificant. When we meet, they will either forgive me or not understand what happened at all." These words show that List still dreams of reuniting with his family in the afterlife, within the distorted reality he has created for himself. John List refused to take direct responsibility for the murders he committed during the trial. He attempted to indirectly excuse himself by claiming that he was not of sound mind at the time. At the end of the trial, the jury did not hesitate to find List guilty of all 5 murders. At the sentencing hearing on April 12, 1990, the judge sentenced John List to 5 consecutive life sentences. This was the most severe punishment possible at the time and meant that List would never be released from prison. The voices of List's family, whom he had silenced with his cold-blooded calculations, were heard before the court of justice. Following the verdict, List's lawyers attempted to appeal the sentence. They argued that their client was unable to make sound judgments due to post-traumatic stress disorder and that the confession letter he left behind could not be considered evidence because it was a confidential religious communication. However, the federal appeals court rejected these defenses and upheld the court's decision. After going to prison, John List lived his life as a quiet inmate. His second wife, Dolores, divorced him and withdrew from his life completely upon learning his true identity. Although John List occasionally communicated with the media, he mostly maintained an introverted profile. Over the years, he began making statements expressing some remorse. In the same 2002 interview with Connie Chung, he said, "I have been praying for forgiveness ever since that day," suggesting he was somewhat repentant. However, John List was not someone who could be forgiven by the victims' families and the public. In America, the name List had become synonymous with a nightmare figure, especially in New Jersey. Indeed, when the Star-Ledger, one of New Jersey's respected newspapers, reported List's death in 2008, it referred to him as the Westfield Monster. After spending 18 years in prison, John List died on March 21, 2008, at the age of 82. Due to complications from pneumonia. List, who remained deeply religious until his death, responded to a priest's question while in prison, "Why didn't you commit suicide?" with, "If I had committed suicide, I wouldn't have gone to heaven." According to him, his divine destiny was to one day reunite with his family in heaven. Despite his actions on earth, the John List case remains one of the most striking examples in American criminal history. Perhaps he could have solved these problems with help. After receiving help for a while and getting his life back on track, and perhaps moving out of his current home to a cheaper one, he could have lived with his family. However, his religious beliefs would have taken him somewhere completely different. I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts on this matter. Let's discuss them in the comments below the video. See you in the next video. Take good care of yourselves.